people falling or people not remembering anything or getting confused. It seems like that's the picture that everybody has of people who are old or getting old, and it's just not the case.
Lots of times when people think of older people, they're thinking of people who are forced into nursing homes because their families can't take care of them, and so they don't do anything, or they're not necessarily encouraged to do anything. But seniors are also people who are people like me. I met Barb in 1967 when I transferred from a small college in Chicago to Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. And she was roving around the campus in her power chair. For most of her life, she weighed in about 95 pounds. She had cerebral palsy, the kind that makes the muscles of the limbs move constantly. Barb's comment about her condition was, "I'm a woman on the move." She was that for sure. What did people say when we started getting serious? The person in charge of the dormitory I lived in pulled me aside and said, "Don't get serious with this girl, because it's going to cause you all kinds of problems. You're going to have huge expenses, and ultimately such a marriage is bound to fail." It didn't. We were married for 40 years.
I don't think anybody's really shocked that I was a man. My voice tends to give me away, and I'm so old that I'm not going to spend the money for voice training. I don't have the confidence that just I can walk in the room and think I'm pulling it off. I can walk in the room and I'm confident with who I am. I knew I was different from age 3. I was in the closet for 68 years. The day after my wife's death 7 years ago, it was a Friday night, I came out the next day. So she gave me life, really twice. Once sitting beside me or standing beside me the whole time we were married. And secondly, then with her death, relieving her of pain, but allowing me to begin to be who I wanted to be. People are saying you're moving too fast. And my answer is, at 73, I wasn't moving fast enough.
I was doing a search of images the other day for a middle-aged woman, and it was very funny because it's the stereotype of an older woman that has gray hair, is kind of stooped over, and I had to really spend a good hour online trying to find positive images of middle-aged women. My parents were immigrants from Greece, and they came back to the United States after World War II, and I was born in the mid-50s. Being the child of immigrants is challenging for anyone. My parents' expectations was that I wouldn't squander my life, and I wouldn't squander the opportunities that this country afforded me. But it was very clear from them that I needed to really make something of myself, because they didn't have that opportunity. And so they would have a sense of satisfaction knowing that I was able to do what they weren't able to do.
I always thought about marriage more as a partnership and an adventure. It's probably why we're still together after all these years, is a great sense of humor, intelligent, he was warm. I thought, well, if you have those qualities, then you've got a great partner for the adventure.
As always, she was more thoughtful than I was. I just fell for her. I always assumed we'd have kids. Leslie didn't make that an automatic assumption, because Leslie was talking about, from a reasoning standpoint, how she felt. I was talking about being an automatic pilot. You got married, you had kids, it wasn't something you thought of.
I had a lot of ambivalence about it. I just didn't feel ready. I didn't feel prepared. It was kind of scary to me. It was like, oh my God, 24/7 responsibility when I'm still want to learn more about myself. And I felt guilty about it. I felt like no one says, oh, that's so great you're not having kids. You know, I joke and say, well, who's going to come visit me in the nursing home? But didn't think that was a good enough reason to have children.
What we've learned is there is no automatic performance. The fact that you have kids does not mean that someone's going to take care of you as you get older or if you become ill.
Being part of a small family, we kind of have to take care of each other. There's not lots of extended family to take care of one another, and so it's really my mom and my dad and my sister and myself, and so we have to take care of each other. So my mom and dad have always been there for my sister and for me, and when I was going through a divorce a few years ago, you know, my parents came up and helped me with doing some things around the house and even helping as my son was growing up. And so those roles have kind of reversed at this point, that although my dad is really quite self-sufficient and he's the caregiver for my mom, I feel like our roles have changed, and that I'm the one looking out for mom and dad as opposed to mom and dad really being the ones looking out for us.
When we arrived in Chicago in 1974, Chicago was not accessible at all. I know now the city is very happy to claim that it is one of the most, if not the most, wheelchair accessible city in the country. In 1974, it was not. We argued and fussed at the city and at the state about getting accessible buses, and they wouldn't do it. So finally, people from ADAPT actually chained themselves to buses. The police came roaring up with their paddy wagons and discovered that they couldn't put them in the paddy wagons because the paddy wagons were inaccessible. And if they had been able to, they would have gotten to the jails and discovered that they couldn't get into the jails because they were inaccessible.
I try to use my life as a transgender woman to help younger trans people survive. And if there's just any little things that I can do for them, I try to do. It started out just being a rounding out of my title, Renaissance Woman and Activist. And then about a year later, I was reported on in a publication that said, mature activists begin addressing the areas of senior aids getting into housing. And at that point, I said, oh, I must be an activist now. And now I just keep running. It was at that point I decided I can walk into any room I want to walk into, and if I'm not learning, then I can just say, out of here.
Being a first-generation American made me realize three things, and I've really kept those throughout my whole life. The first thing is that you can really take nothing for granted. When you're first generation, you really have to work hard at everything. The second thing I think it's done is that it's made me a very curious person. And I think the third thing that it did is it made me very grateful. It's really important for me to pass that on to other people, to other immigrants who are trying to have a better life for themselves and their families in this country.
Hi. Fancy meeting you here. You in town?
Yeah. Glad you could make it.
Yeah. The way our lives have unfolded have been very rewarding.
Not having children allowed me to really put a lot of energy into my work, but it is not the reason I didn't have children.
Apart from these momentary thoughts of, oh my God, it would be so, it would be a wonderful feeling to see a child get married or to experience a grandchild. those are few and far between.
I don't have regrets. Sometimes I feel a little tug on my heart when I see those special moments. And I didn't want to have that adventure of raising a child as compared to the adventure of traveling and exploring our relationship and exploring other countries and having a lot of freedom to do a lot of different things.
We started to notice signs with my mom of things that she used to do all the time. She was struggling with balancing the checkbook, which is one of those classic signs of, the first signs of Alzheimer's. She was struggling with normal things that she would do, like paying the bills, and would get her very frustrated because it didn't make sense to her. I don't think you ever really fully get the diagnosis for Alzheimer's. You just have confirmation of the different symptoms, and she doesn't remember us sometimes. And I think that's the hardest thing. That was one of my things that my dad said that was the thing that he was concerned most about, was that someday she wouldn't remember him. At the end of the day, she kind of forgets who he is, and sometimes when I'm there, she doesn't know, She knows I'm a familiar person, but sometimes not quite sure I'm her daughter, and that hurts the most, I think. It's one of the things that I always think about. It's like, oh, you always have your memories, and it's like, no, you don't when you have Alzheimer's, and it's, I think that's the thing that wounds so much. And my mom still looks like my mom, and I'm sure to my dad still looks like the woman that he's been living with and married to, but she doesn't recognize that. And that intimacy and relationships are lost, and Alzheimer's taken that away.
When Barb died, I was devastated. Forget the caretaking. We had fun together. We did all kinds of things together. We had separate lives already. It was a much more normal life than many people expect. One thing that isn't easy yet, but will after a while, is I want to write my memoir. And basically, I want to write my life with Barb, because I think it's an important story. There are still many, many, many people who feel that a disabled person should not get married. And I want to help dispel that myth, and I also want to encourage young disabled people that it doesn't really matter whether you're disabled or not, it's who you are inside that counts.
My son sent Stephanie a Father's Day card this past March and said, "Thank you for being my father." He addressed it to Stephanie and said, "Thank you for being my father." So it's little steps, and you just keep going. Every time I read the card, I cry. Is it the way I'd want it? No. But you know something? All I can help is that people take my experiences and make their life better.
The advice that I would give to other first-generation Americans is realize that you have as much right as anyone else to be happy and successful in this country. Oftentimes that's hard because there's a lot of forces that would have you believe otherwise. As the child of immigrants, you have strength and a determination and resiliency that most people don't have. That gets rewarded most times.
Looking back on my life, I would say that the most important thing is to be true to yourself and to live authentically.
I guess for each of us that means different things, and that's a ongoing process that never ends. I mean, I feel it in a different way, but I still feel it today.
One of the things, and I think this is common with people that have Alzheimer's, is music is really meaningful. It's one of the last things that they hold on to. And so my dad's always playing music, and when I go to be with my parents on the weekends, I like to put music on, and it's really, it kind of brings my mom to life. And so even if my mom didn't know who we were, it brought some happiness to her, and I don't know, it was just a fun, spontaneous thing that's a way to connect with our parents on kind of a different and joyful level.
We all have to get used to the idea of a revolving door of relationships. Because people are going to die, they're going to move away, they're just going to go their separate ways from us. So when we see a big number, like somebody's 80, 90, or 100, we say, oh, you know, they're old and they're running out of time. So this is really the reality of this age thing, is we're all looking at it like that clock is ticking, and that's scary.
Oh yeah, time flies. You and I were like ships in the night. Sometimes I wish we'd collide and sank down together like Romeo and Juliet, the most poetic of where the bird was still on the surface, still floating